Hey, what's going on, guys? So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about clean code and not really in a sense where I'm giving you tips on how to write clean code. There's plenty of that on YouTube and other places, but I want to talk more about how important or unimportant it actually is and how every developer is different and has different preferences. So how much of clean code is actually preference versus actually set in stone, good or bad. And this video might piss off a few developers. I know some people really take this stuff to heart, but it's just my personal advice and opinion. So let's get into it. All right, so before we get started, I just want to mention today's sponsor, Agora. So Agora is a real-time engagement platform that provides us with all the tools for building out features like audio and video calling, along with real-time data signaling right into your applications. With Agora, you get SDKs and you get low-code tools to build all sorts of video calling features like group chats, with screen sharing and recording. You can stream to third-party platforms like YouTube and so much more. If you've ever set up WebSockets for real-time messaging, you know that it can be quite the headache. So Agora makes it easy to implement all of these real-time features. So for more information, you can click the link in the description or visit agora.io today. All right, so clean code is a term that you'll hear over and over as a developer, no matter which language you code in. And I know for me, when I got started, it was pretty intimidating. Was I doing everything correctly? Was I doing anything correctly? And a few years later, on top of that, I started putting out tutorials and putting my code out there for the world. And I did get, and I still do get, quite a bit of feedback, and some of it is just pure trolling. Some of it is constructive criticism that I take into account. And I've actually learned a lot from just from people commenting on my videos. And then I would say a good amount of it is, it's not trolling. It's also not something that matters. It's not something that solves a problem. It's just someone else would have done something different. And I think that one of the most important things to realize is that in many ways, the term clean code can be subjective. We all have different experiences and we all do things in different ways and learn differently. And for instance, if you're talking about commenting, it depends on who you ask. Some developers will say that clean code means having really descriptive comments so that others, if they look at your code, they know exactly what's going on. And then others will say that clean code means having no comments at all and your code should be descriptive enough on its own. And I don't think that there's really a right or wrong answer to that, along with many other things. And one thing I've noticed with programmers, including myself, is that we tend to think in like black and white or true or false, ones and zeros. In fact, my wife has told me on many occasions that since I started to code, I've become more like this, seeing things one way or another, when in reality, there's a lot of gray areas. So last week, I posted a tweet asking people about some of the core clean code principles that they follow, and I'll put a link to the tweet in the description. But just the responses to that tweet shows how everyone has different standards. And I think that's fine. You shouldn't be forced to do things a certain way unless what you're doing just is an absolute mess or just isn't working. I guess I can see if you're on a team and there's certain guidelines you have to follow, certain way you have to do things to maximize productivity. But as far as just in general, I think a lot of it comes down to preference. Now, just to give you kind of a better idea of what I'm talking about, I want to talk about a key principle when it comes to clean code, and that's the concept of dry code. In that tweet response, one person said that they prefer wet over dry. Now, if you've been coding for any amount of time, you probably heard the acronym DRY. It stands for don't repeat yourself. And it basically means that if you have code that is identical or very similar in multiple places, then put it into a function or a class rather than writing the same code over and over. Now, if the code is absolutely identical, then yes, I'd say always put it into a function. But where you can run into issues with dry is when it's not identical and you're using abstraction and some things are a little different, so you're adding all these conditionals. And oftentimes your abstraction can be wrong and create more bugs later on down the line. Or your abstraction is right, but there's so much of it, you have so many conditionals, it just turns into spaghetti code. So what WET stands for is write everything twice. And the idea is that you don't rush into abstractions, you don't refactor unless you start writing your code, or the same code, I should say, 3, 4+ times. And for me, I've always had it drilled into my head that you don't repeat yourself. But the wet principle actually makes sense to me. And it might not to you. But again, it comes down to preference based on your experiences. Now, I do think that there are some things that can just be objectively good or objectively bad. A good example of that, I'd say, is consistency across your project. There's a lot of things that you can talk about, but say, for instance, variable names or function names. If you're using all camel case, but then just for the hell of it, you have a couple functions that use underscores, I don't think that that's very good practice. I think that being consistent across your project really matters and should always be looked at. There also may be situations where you're writing code in a way that causes your application to slow down or have a larger file size. If there's a relatively easy way to fix that, I think that should be done. You know, if what you're doing makes your code a few milliseconds slower, that's not noticeable at all, and it's more readable, I think that's fine, because I have seen people do some crazy stuff that no one else can read or make sense of just to save those couple milliseconds. To me, it's just a given that readability trumps those few milliseconds. Just like readability trumps not repeating yourself and adding all these crazy abstractions. So what I really want you guys to take from this, because I know I'm going in a few different directions, is that yes, there are best practices that for the most part you should try and follow, but don't be intimidated or overwhelmed that your code is bad or you're doing something wrong just because you read an article or something like that. If you like having long descriptive comments in your code and you watch a video or you read an article that says not to use comments at all, don't go and change your style up just because you read that article or whatever. You know, the truth is a lot of programmers just like to kind of enforce on other people what they do. And if you don't do what they do, then you're wrong or you're a bad programmer. We've all seen people like this in Stack Overflow and all over the internet, really. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you also have people that are like, screw it, it works. And I don't think that's a good way to be either. The reason for that is because it may work at the moment, but you know that you're opening yourself up to even more issues down the road. Your users are going to start having issues, and it's just going to be a massive headache. So I would definitely say, try and write the best code you can. Even if it does work, still look it over and do the best you can. So my advice would be to be somewhere in the middle of the best practice fascists and the screw it works developers. But that's it, guys. I'd love to hear your opinion on clean code. How much of it do you think is preference and how much is actually just set in stone? But that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.